It was one of those nights where the city itself seemed to hold its breath. The streets of Los Angeles lay quiet, drenched in the neon glow of street lamps, the occasional car slicing through the silence like a fleeting thought. In the heart of Encino, a sprawling studio hummed with the soft whir of machines, an almost sacred sanctuary of sound. Inside, Michael Jackson sat alone, headphones pressed to his ears, fingers lightly tapping a rhythm on the console. His mind, a symphony of melodies and perfectionism, was already deep in a world only he could hear. And then, a knock, sharp, deliberate, almost theatrical, echoed through the studio. Michael froze. It was late. No one knew he was here. Visitors were rare at this hour. And yet, the knock repeated, more insistent this time, like a heartbeat that refused to be ignored. When he opened the door, there stood a figure almost as legendary, almost as enigmatic, almost as mythic Prince. Cloaked in an aura of mystery, his presence seemed to bend the room around him, a force of unpredictability wrapped in charm and quiet power. The public had always painted them as rivals, a perpetual game of who was greater, yet here in the private darkness of a music sanctuary, the rules of the world outside didn't apply. No cameras, no critics, no charts. Just two giants in a room, separated by whispers, rumors, and decades of myth. The tension was almost tangible, like the calm before a storm. What had brought Prince here? What did he want? And perhaps most importantly, could this night be a collision of creativity so intense that the world would never recover, if only it were witnessed? This wasn't just a meeting. It wasn't a casual visit. This was the kind of night that legends are made of. Every step, every glance, every unspoken word carried weight, an invisible score playing in the air around them. Fans would never know the truth. Biographers would speculate for decades. But for this night, history itself had paused to watch. As Prince stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click, a spark, intangible yet undeniable, flared between them. Music was in the air, thick as tension, electric as lightning. It was a night poised on the knife's edge of creation and conflict, a night where magic could be made or shattered. And in that first breath, that first gaze, both men knew that nothing would ever be the same again. To understand the magnitude of this moment, you have to know who they were. Michael Jackson, the consummate showman, the perfectionist whose life was measured in beats and notes, whose art was a mirror to both genius and obsession. Every movement, every sound, every gesture was calculated, refined, polished, until it shimmered with a brilliance no one else could touch. He was a sculptor of sound, molding the intangible into shapes the world could see, feel, and carry in their hearts forever. And then there was Prince. Prince, the enigma, the rebel, the wild card of music. Where Michael chased perfection, Prince chased expression, raw, unpredictable, untamed. His artistry was a storm contained within a single body, a kaleidoscope of sounds and rhythms that defied convention. He was mercurial, impulsive, and brilliant in ways the world often failed to fully grasp. And he knew it. The public had always framed them as rivals. Michael, the king of pop. Prince, the radical virtuoso. Headlines had pitted them against each other. Fans had chosen sides, and yet the reality was far more complex. Behind the glitz and rivalry, both men were driven by the same relentless obsession, the pursuit of musical transcendence, the need to create something that would outlast time itself. In private, they were not caricatures. Michael's obsession with control often softened into vulnerability when it came to his peers. Prince's arrogance often dissolved into quiet admiration when he recognized a kindred spirit. And yet, their first real encounter, away from the cameras, away from the gossip, was charged with every emotion that had ever defined their public personas. Curiosity, tension, wonder, and a faint undercurrent of suspicion. Could two such forces coexist in one room? Could inspiration bloom without confrontation? Or would their egos collide in a cacophony as destructive as it was brilliant? As Michael led Prince deeper into the studio, the contrast of their styles became immediately apparent. Michael's instruments were arranged with precision, everything in its place, the room almost humming with intention. Prince's presence, meanwhile, seemed to rearrange the air itself, bending patterns, testing boundaries, leaving no corner untouched. The stage was set, though no performance had yet begun. And yet, in that silent dance of anticipation, the audience of history, though unseen, waited. The story of this night began long before the knock at the door. Invitations, after all, are rarely casual. In this case, Prince's decision to appear in Michael's studio was neither random nor simple. He had sent word in advance, cryptic and tantalizing, a message wrapped in ambiguity. The details of why he came were never fully revealed. A new collaboration? A challenge? A simple curiosity? Or perhaps a desire to test the boundaries of genius itself? Michael had received the note days earlier, its handwriting deliberate, elegant, almost teasing. He'd studied it over and over, weighing the possibilities, imagining outcomes that ranged from exhilarating to disastrous. And yet, as the night drew on, he found himself both anxious and thrilled. The stakes were enormous. History could be written here, or it could collapse in silence, leaving only rumors and speculation. When the knock came, the tension that had been building over days crystallized in a heartbeat. Michael opened the door, and there was Prince, unexpected, calm, almost otherworldly. He didn't rush. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he let the room breathe, let the gravity of his presence settle, and in doing so, he demanded attention without uttering a single word. And that was the genius of Prince. He understood the art of anticipation, the power of the unspoken. Every gesture was calculated to provoke thought, spark curiosity, unsettle expectation. Michael, for all his confidence and mastery, felt a thrill of uncertainty. What would happen in the next few hours? Would they clash like titans or fuse like a supernova of sound? Prince's eyes lingered on the studio, the equipment, the faint traces of music still humming in the air. He didn't comment. He didn't rush. He simply existed, and the room responded. And then, with a tilt of his head and a smile that carried both mischief and intent, he stepped fully inside. The door closed behind him, and the night, until that moment quiet and controlled, transformed. It became a space charged with potential, a crucible where the unthinkable could be created. What would come of this meeting? Would the world ever know? That question hung in the air, heavier than any note, as Michael and Prince faced each other in the silence, poised on the edge of an encounter that would be whispered about for decades, but never fully revealed. The possibilities stretched out before them like a vast, uncharted melody, and neither man could yet know if the music would be harmony or chaos. The air inside the studio was electric, as though the walls themselves recognized the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Michael Jackson, meticulous and deliberate, had always treated music as a sacred ritual, each note a brushstroke on an invisible canvas. Prince, unpredictable and fluid, treated it as an extension of himself, alive, untamed, and occasionally dangerous. And now, in the quiet, their energies collided. Subtle but profound, Prince's eyes swept across the room, taking in the instruments, the soundboards, the faint residue of melodies that Michael had left lingering in the air. He didn't speak at first. He simply moved, almost dancing between the equipment, his fingers tracing surfaces as if to absorb the studio's history and the genius it had already witnessed. Michael, watching carefully, felt that familiar thrill, the thrill of someone who could challenge, who could surprise, who could push boundaries further than anyone else. "Nice setup," Prince said finally, his voice calm, almost teasing, yet layered with the weight of someone who knew the power of words. Michael nodded, a half-smile forming. He had anticipated this encounter for years, imagined it in private moments of obsession and inspiration. But imagination could never capture the raw unpredictability of the man standing before him. They exchanged pleasantries, each carefully measured, each layered with unspoken meaning. Michael, always attentive to rhythm, sensed the subtle cues in Prince's movements, the flick of a wrist, the tilt of the head, the slight hesitation before a word. Prince, ever perceptive, noted Michael's poise, his control, his constant awareness of the space, the sound, and the atmosphere. Two geniuses sizing each other up, each aware of the history and myth surrounding them, yet both craving something more than what the public had ever been allowed to see. Then, almost instinctively, the conversation shifted. Words gave way to music. Michael moved to the keyboard, his fingers dancing across the keys in a melody half improvised, half calculated. Prince watched, listening, absorbing, waiting for the right moment to intervene. And when he did, it was as if a new dimension had been added to the room. His guitar whispered notes that intertwined with Michael's chords, creating a sound that neither could have achieved alone. A sound that seemed to shimmer in the air, teasing the very limits of possibility. For a moment, time itself seemed suspended. They played, they listened, they responded, an unspoken conversation of genius, alternating between harmony and tension, collaboration and challenge. Every note carried stakes, every rhythm hinted at revelations. And yet beneath the synergy, there was the ever-present shadow of rivalry. Could this magic sustain itself, or would ego, pride, or difference in vision tear it apart before it fully manifested? The first encounter ended abruptly with silence. Both men paused, breathless, aware of the fragile intensity they had just shared. Michael glanced at Prince, a question unspoken in his eyes. Is this the start of something historic, or merely a fleeting experiment doomed to remain in whispers? Prince smiled faintly, enigmatic as ever, leaving the answer tantalizingly out of reach. The tension lingered like a suspended note, unresolved and magnetic. To understand the night fully, one must understand the forces driving each man. Michael Jackson, for all his outward perfection and charm, carried a constant pressure, an invisible weight that few could perceive. Fame, expectation, and the relentless quest for flawless artistry shaped him. Every melody was scrutinized, every lyric dissected, every beat examined, until it reflected an almost otherworldly precision. Music wasn't merely creation for him. It was survival, an armor against chaos, and a pathway to immortality. Prince, in contrast, bore a private intensity that few witnessed. His genius was boundless, but it came with chains of its own, control, secrecy, and a fear of compromise. He guarded his creative process with almost feral instinct, allowing only those he truly trusted to glimpse the full breadth of his vision. Collaboration for him was dangerous territory, an invitation to either transcendence or disappointment. And yet, here he was, stepping into the sanctum of another legend, risking exposure, risking tension, risking the unknown. As the night progressed, layers of their personalities began to emerge in the music itself. Michael's meticulousness demanded structure, his melodies precise yet fluid, almost like a river contained within invisible walls. Prince's improvisation injected unpredictability, sudden crescendos and quiet whispers that challenged Michael's rhythm, pushing him beyond his usual boundaries. Together, they were both harmonious and dissonant, a perfect storm of genius clashing and merging simultaneously. Amid the music, glimpses of vulnerability surfaced. Michael spoke softly of the pressures he endured, the scrutiny of fans, the relentless expectations of the industry, the endless pursuit of an unattainable ideal. Prince, listening intently, revealed fragments of his own struggle, the fear of losing creative control, the isolation of being revered yet misunderstood, the endless tension between innovation and acceptance. Neither had spoken these words aloud to anyone before. The studio became a confessional, a crucible where music and truth intertwined. And then came the rumors, the whispers that would never make the headlines. Stories of melodies composed that night, fleeting harmonies that vanished as quickly as they were imagined. Tracks that could have rewritten music history but remained hidden, buried under ego, perfectionism, or simply the capricious nature of genius. The secret was not just the collaboration, it was the near-invisible threads of emotion, ambition and conflict woven into every note. A crescendo built, subtle yet insistent, as if the night itself demanded revelation. Could this night produce the song that would eclipse everything either had ever done? Could the world, if it ever heard it, truly comprehend the weight of what had passed in silence? Or would it remain a phantom, a legend whispered among insiders, its brilliance visible only in memory and speculation? As Section 4 draws to a close, a question hangs. What might have been? Behind the music, behind the genius, behind the shadows of rivalry and respect lay the unspoken truth. Some of history's most powerful creations are never meant to be seen, only felt. And in the quiet of that studio, as the night stretched on, both men knew that whatever had begun was extraordinary, and yet somehow just out of reach. The door remained closed. The city outside slept. Inside, two legends wrestled with sound, ambition, and the intangible pull of history, leaving the world to wonder what secrets would never escape the shadows. The night had deepened, and the studio had transformed into a world unto itself, a universe where time slowed. Sound became tangible, and every breath carried potential. Michael Jackson and Prince were no longer merely musicians. They were architects of possibility, shaping air and silence into something that hummed with meaning. The first tentative notes had blossomed into a delicate tension, a tentative dialogue that could either ignite into brilliance or collapse under its own weight. Michael, ever precise, suggested a melody, one that he had been developing in secret for weeks. His fingers danced across the keyboard with the fluidity of someone who had lived in music his entire life. Prince leaned over, listening, his head tilted, absorbing every nuance. And then, almost instinctively, he added a layer of rhythm, subtle yet daring, weaving his own signature unpredictability into the framework Michael had laid out. For a moment, the room seemed to shimmer. Notes intertwined, harmonies collided and merged, producing a sound that neither had ever created alone. It was as if the universe itself had paused to witness their convergence. In that instant, the public rivalries, the egos, the expectations, all faded into irrelevance. They were no longer two men. They were forces of nature, coalescing in a space where creation was both fragile and unstoppable. But genius rarely exists without tension. Michael, protective of structure, hesitated at Prince's sudden deviation from the melody. The air thickened with unspoken conflict, two visions, both brilliant, vying for dominance. Prince, equally unyielding, refused to compromise, believing the beauty of the moment lay in its spontaneity, its unpredictability. The room became a chessboard, every note a calculated move, every silence a challenge. They paused, locking eyes, aware of the precarious balance between collaboration and confrontation. The music had reached a precipice, teetering between transcendent creation and potential collapse. The world outside could never imagine the intensity of what was unfolding within these walls. And then, without warning, a tension so delicate yet overwhelming filled the space. It was the point where history could be made or lost, where a single decision could determine whether this night would be remembered as legend or vanish into obscurity. Michael exhaled. Prince smiled faintly, enigmatic as ever. The session lingered on the knife's edge. Neither would back down, yet neither could ignore the electric magic between them. Could they transform this fragile alignment into a finished masterpiece? Or would perfectionism, pride, and the weight of unspoken expectations shatter it before it could ever see the light of day? And then, almost imperceptibly, the room fell silent. Not in resolution, but in suspended anticipation. The music, the energy, the near collision of titanic genius, everything was held in balance. The answer remained out of reach. The collaboration, as magical as it had begun, hovered on the verge of what might have been, leaving the night itself pregnant with possibility and unspoken wonder. If the collaboration hung in delicate tension, the underlying dynamic between them was even more intricate, a dance of rivalry and respect that had defined their entire careers. Michael, disciplined, controlled, always attuned to perfection, had a reputation for holding others at arm's length, for protecting the sanctity of his vision. Prince, enigmatic, mercurial, and fiercely independent, had built his legacy on defying expectations, bending rules, and asserting his genius on his own terms. And yet, here they were, in a room charged with mutual recognition of talent beyond measure. The subtle power dynamics were impossible to ignore. Michael's gaze measured Prince, evaluating, probing for weaknesses and brilliance alike. Prince, smiling with a faint mixture of amusement and challenge, responded in kind, projecting a confidence that could unsettle even the most disciplined mind. Every note they played, every silence they shared, became a statement, a negotiation of genius, a subtle conversation of supremacy and admiration, unspoken yet profoundly present. Moments of harmony alternated with brief sparks of tension. A chord would resolve beautifully, then a sudden flourish from Prince would shift the balance, a reminder that nothing in this room was predictable, nothing fully controlled. Michael would counter with precision, layering structure onto improvisation, asserting his meticulous vision. And yet, beneath the surface, respect shimmered, acknowledgement that each was formidable, that each could elevate the other in ways no one else could. At one point, Michael paused mid-melody, leaning back as he considered Prince's contributions. For a fleeting second, it felt as though time itself held its breath. Could he embrace this unpredictability, allow the music to flow free of control, or would he retreat to the familiar sanctuary of order? Prince, observing silently, extended a hand, figuratively, almost provocatively, toward collaboration, a gesture that carried both challenge and invitation. It was in these moments that the true drama of the night revealed itself. Two colossal talents, bound by history, ego, and the unrelenting pursuit of perfection, attempting to merge visions that had long defined them as separate entities. They were rivals in the public eye, yet private admiration, curiosity, and the spark of possibility allowed for fleeting unity. And yet, even as respect underpinned the tension, uncertainty persisted. Could these two forces truly align to create something historic? Or was the very nature of their brilliance destined to clash, producing sparks that would illuminate the night but never crystallize into a finished masterpiece? The studio, filled with echoes of music and whispered emotion, held the answer tantalizingly out of reach. As the night stretched on, a quiet realization settled between them. Genius is as much about isolation as collaboration, about understanding both your own limits and the limits of others. In that room, two legends faced the impossible: to respect one another fully, to challenge without breaking, and to glimpse the edge of creation without ever knowing if it would sustain itself. The tension remained unresolved, the stakes impossibly high, the possibilities infinite. And then came a subtle shift, a glance, a note held just a fraction longer, a shared rhythm that hinted at understanding yet promised more. The night was far from over, yet the world outside would never know the full extent of what had passed. What had begun as rivalry, tension, and curiosity was transforming into something more profound, a delicate dance of genius, poised on the knife's edge of history. The question remained: would this dance culminate in revelation, or would it dissolve into whispers and legend, a fleeting encounter that only those present could truly comprehend? The answer lay in the hours yet to come, as the night pressed onward, and two titans of music continued their silent negotiation of creativity, respect, and power. Hours had passed, yet the air inside the studio felt electric, charged with a tension that seemed almost tangible. Music had flowed, clashed, and converged like a storm, each note a pulse of possibility. But even in the midst of brilliance, something shifted, a subtle turning point that would define the night. It was almost imperceptible at first. A glance, a hesitation, a silence that lingered longer than expected. Michael paused mid-phrase, his eyes catching a flicker of something in Prince's expression. An idea unspoken, a boundary tested, a truth lurking behind that enigmatic smile. Prince, too, seemed to sense the pivot, the edge where collaboration might transform into revelation or confrontation. The weight of unspoken history pressed down, heavier than the instruments, heavier than the music itself. Suddenly, Prince leaned forward, his fingers striking the keys with a flourish that was both bold and intimate. The sound reverberated through the room, breaking the rhythm, interrupting the flow, yet somehow enhancing it. Michael's reaction was instantaneous. A pause, a recalibration, a flicker of surprise that gave way to admiration. The dynamic had changed. The balance of power, of creativity, of possibility had shifted. In that instant, the stakes became impossible to ignore. This was no longer merely an encounter between two legends. It was a confrontation of visions, a collision of genius that demanded attention. Michael's meticulous structure clashed with Prince's improvisational audacity, yet the tension was not destructive, it was transformative. Each recognized the brilliance in the other, each sensed that this night could yield something unprecedented. Then came the revelation, subtle but seismic. A melody, improvised and raw, emerged from the convergence of their styles. It was a fragment, a fleeting echo of what could have been a masterpiece, a sound that hinted at the power of unity without fully revealing it. The room held its breath. They both knew it. The world outside could never grasp this, could never witness the full scope of what was happening. And yet in that suspended moment, history was being written in invisible ink. But genius is never without risk. Michael's perfectionism bristled at Prince's spontaneity. Prince's intensity threatened to overwhelm Michael's careful structure. Words were exchanged, subtle but loaded, and the tension escalated. Could they reconcile vision and improvisation, control and freedom, ego and respect? The answer was uncertain, teetering on the edge of possibility and failure. As the night deepened, both men paused, aware that the turning point had arrived. They had glimpsed the apex of creation, the precipice of something monumental. And yet, like all moments of genius, it remained fragile, ephemeral, hanging in the balance between history and myth. Could they capture it fully, or would it dissolve into legend, existing only in memory and speculation? The question lingered, unresolved, as the studio hummed with the echoes of possibility. The turning point had left an imprint, subtle but indelible. What followed was an exploration of sound and silence, a dance of creation that would leave traces invisible to the outside world. The melodies they shared, the rhythms they experimented with were ephemeral, almost sacred, impossible to document fully, destined to exist only in the memory of those present. Prince picked up a guitar, letting fingers slide across strings in patterns that defied convention. Michael responded with subtle adjustments, layering harmonies, refining chords, crafting counterpoints that teased perfection without ever fully achieving it. The interplay was magnetic, an unspoken dialogue that transcended words, a conversation of genius played in sound alone. Rumors would emerge over the years, whispers of recordings that never saw the light of day, of jams that were erased or shelved, of fragments of songs that could have rewritten music history. These whispers hinted at what the public would never hear, at the hidden brilliance that existed in moments like this one. But the truth was even more elusive. Some of these tracks may have existed only in memory, fleeting, ephemeral, impossible to capture in any tangible form. The night pressed on, and the atmosphere in the studio became almost surreal. Every sound, every pause, every improvisation carried weight. Laughter mixed with concentration, frustration intertwined with inspiration, and each man sensed the other's brilliance as both a challenge and a gift. They were creating yet holding back, collaborating yet guarding the essence of their genius. And then came the small, quiet moments, almost invisible to anyone outside that room. A glance exchanged over a chord, a smile at an unexpected rhythm. A pause, a breath, a subtle acknowledgement of shared understanding. These moments were not monumental in isolation, but together they formed the backbone of the night's magic. They were fleeting, delicate, and entirely unrecorded, yet they carried the emotional weight of a lifetime. The hidden moments revealed something profound. That genius is as much about restraint as it is about expression. The music they created, the tension and harmony they explored, existed in a liminal space between revelation and secrecy. Some of it might never be heard. Some of it might never be recreated. But in those hours, in that studio, two of the greatest musical minds of a generation had glimpsed a possibility so rare and potent that it could never fully be shared. And as dawn approached, the night's energy began to wane, though its impact lingered. The world outside remained unaware of what had transpired, yet the echoes of that evening would haunt history. Unheard tracks, hidden moments, and the unspoken tension between two legends became a myth. A story whispered by insiders, speculated upon by biographers, and immortalized in the imagination of fans. The final question lingered, haunting and unresolved. What if some of this magic still existed? Hidden in a forgotten tape, an unreleased demo, or the memory of a fleeting note? Could the world ever truly comprehend the brilliance that had passed in silence? Or would it remain forever a legend, known only to the room, to the night, and to the two men who dared to imagine the impossible? The studio was quiet now, shadows stretching across instruments, faint remnants of music lingering in the air like a whisper. The night was over, yet its story was only beginning to ripple outward, leaving the impossible question hanging. What might have been, had the collaboration reached its full potential? The night had reached a point where every note, every silence, every glance was amplified by the weight of anticipation. Michael Jackson and Prince were no longer merely two legendary artists. They were embodiments of creativity itself, forces colliding in a room that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. The turning point had passed. The hidden moments had been glimpsed, and now, the apex of the night was upon them, a moment charged with intensity that neither could have anticipated. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly. A melody, soft, tentative, haunting, emerged from Michael's fingers, a thread that seemed to stitch together everything that had come before. Prince responded instantly, weaving in layers of rhythm and counterpoint, shaping and reshaping the sound with a precision that bordered on instinct. The music expanded, swelling into a cascade of harmonies that seemed impossible to contain. It was as if the room had become a living organism, breathing in sync with their genius, vibrating with a power that could be felt in the bones. And then the unexpected happened. A subtle clash, a brief, almost imperceptible moment of tension, arose, reminding both men that genius is never without conflict. Michael's meticulous structure collided with Prince's improvisational audacity, creating a friction so intense that it sent shivers through the very air. Yet rather than breaking, the tension elevated the music, transforming it into something unprecedented. Every note became a revelation, every chord a potential turning point in history. In those hours, the world outside ceased to exist. There were no fans, no critics, no expectations, only two titans dancing on the knife's edge of creation. They had reached a point where perfection was within reach, yet fleeting, as if the universe itself had suspended time to allow this encounter to unfold. Every movement, every sound, carried emotional gravity. Michael's attention to detail and Prince's instinctive brilliance collided and converged, producing harmonies that were simultaneously structured and wild, disciplined and free, controlled and explosive. It was in this moment that the night revealed its most shocking truth. The music they had created, ephemeral and unrecorded, held the potential to redefine pop culture, to merge two worlds of genius that had been imagined as forever separate. But that truth came with a haunting realization. Some creations are too delicate to be captured, too powerful to be contained. The apex was fleeting, a moment suspended in time, destined to exist only in memory and legend. And yet, in that suspended moment, the emotional intensity reached a crescendo. Laughter mingled with concentration, admiration with challenge, tension with revelation. They had glimpsed the impossible, collaboration at the highest level, where ego, pride, and genius converged. The climax was not merely musical, it was human, a profound expression of vulnerability, courage, and creativity. As the night approached its end, a final unspoken acknowledgement passed between them. It was not a triumph in the conventional sense, nor a failure. It was a revelation. That genius, when it collides with genius, can create magic that transcends comprehension, yet remains elusive. The apex had been reached, and the room seemed to sigh, a quiet echo of the extraordinary, leaving the night suspended between reality and myth. As the first hints of dawn began to filter through the studio windows, the night's intensity slowly dissipated, leaving in its wake a quiet reverence. The instruments, once alive with electricity, now rested in stillness. The air, thick with the resonance of creation, carried an unspoken truth. What had occurred was monumental, yet invisible to the world outside. Michael Jackson and Prince stood. Together, two figures bound by music and ambition, by respect and rivalry. Their collaboration, however fleeting, had reached a height few could imagine. And yet, in the stillness, both understood that the magic of that night could never be fully captured. Some moments are meant to exist only in the liminal space between. Creation and myth, accessible only to those present, imperceptible to anyone else. The night had revealed the essence of their genius. Michael's pursuit of perfection, tempered by Prince's fearless spontaneity, had created something ephemeral yet transformative. It was a reminder that brilliance is often defined not by what is recorded or released, but by what is experienced, even if only in fragments, even if only in memory. The echoes of unrecorded tracks and hidden moments would ripple through the years, whispered among insiders, speculated upon by biographers, and imagined by fans. There was a subtle beauty in the impermanence. Michael and Prince had danced on the edge of history, creating magic that defied documentation. Each note, each pause, each fleeting smile had contributed to a night that would live forever in legend, if not in sound. The world would never hear the music exactly as it happened, but that did not diminish its power. In a sense, the impermanence made it all the more profound. Some brilliance is too delicate, too extraordinary to survive the world's scrutiny. As they prepared to leave the studio, a quiet understanding passed between them. No words were necessary. They had shared a glimpse of something extraordinary, a rare alignment of talent and vision. It was a testament to what is possible when genius meets genius, when respect tempers rivalry, and when the pursuit of creation outweighs the pursuit of recognition. The night had been a crucible, a test of patience, creativity, and courage. And both men had emerged changed, if only subtly, by the experience. For those who would later hear rumors of the night, the story became a legend. Unheard tracks, hidden collaborations, and fleeting harmonies fueled speculation for decades. Fans would wonder, biographers would theorize, and yet the truth would remain tantalizingly out of reach. And perhaps that was the point. Some moments of history are meant to inspire imagination rather than be fully understood, to exist in the space between myth and reality, tantalizingly close but forever just beyond grasp. As the studio doors closed, behind them, the city outside remained oblivious to the encounter that had transpired within. And yet, the echoes of that night lingered, intangible, profound, and eternal. Michael Jackson and Prince had met, created, clashed, and converged in a way that no recording could ever fully convey, leaving behind a legend that would be whispered, imagined, and revered for generations to come. The final truth of the night was simple yet profound. Genius is not merely what is heard, but what is felt, what is imagined, what lingers in the quiet spaces of memory and history. And in that quiet, the night would live forever, a testament to the power of creativity, the fragility of perfection, and the enduring allure of what might have been. The world may never know the full story, but in the hearts and minds of those who imagine it, the night Prince walked into Michael Jackson's studio remains immortal, a collision of titans, a fleeting miracle, a whisper of possibility that continues to echo through time. The night was over, yet its echoes refused to fade. In the silence of the studio, one could almost hear the lingering resonance of genius, the traces of melodies that never reached the public, the invisible threads of collaboration that had briefly linked two of music's most brilliant minds. Michael Jackson and Prince had departed, leaving behind instruments that seemed almost reverent, as if they too understood the weight of what had transpired. To grasp the magnitude of that encounter, one must look beyond the surface of public rivalry. Michael, with his relentless perfectionism and meticulous attention to detail, had sought to craft sound that could move hearts and endure history. Prince, with his boundless inventiveness and unpredictable genius, had challenged conventions, reshaping what was possible in music. The collision of these worlds, structure versus spontaneity, control versus instinct, had created something ephemeral yet profound, a brief glimpse of musical transcendence that would never be replicated. Biographers and fans would speculate endlessly. Some would imagine unreleased tracks, hidden harmonies, and secret jams. Others would tell tales of tension and near clashes, wondering if the night had ended in collaboration or quiet discord. Yet the truth was subtler. It was neither total triumph nor absolute failure. It was the delicate, fleeting magic that occurs when two geniuses meet, each recognizing the brilliance of the other while remaining fiercely protective of their own vision. And there, in the quiet, lay the lesson. Genius is as much about restraint and respect as it is about creation. The night revealed that true artistry requires courage, the courage to meet another mind of equal power, to push boundaries, and to embrace the unknown. It also revealed the fragility of perfection. Some creations are too delicate to survive. Scrutiny, some harmonies too raw to be contained, some moments too profound to be fully captured. The legacy of that night was not in what could be measured or recorded, but in what could be felt. It existed in the suspended silence after a note, in the unspoken understanding between two artists, and in the imagination of those who would hear fragments and imagine the whole. History remembers accomplishments, but it whispers of impossible encounters. And the night Prince walked into Michael Jackson's studio became one of those whispers, immortal, untouchable, tantalizingly close, yet forever beyond reach. Yet, the influence of that night rippled outward, subtle but undeniable. Ideas germinated, approaches shifted, and echoes of their collaboration could be traced in the music each would produce thereafter. Even the world that never witnessed the encounter felt its presence indirectly. A new approach to melody, a fleeting harmonic choice, an instinctive rhythm. The night had left its mark, invisible but indelible. A reminder that creativity, when it collides with brilliance, leaves traces that endure beyond visibility. And so the story of the night became legend, not because of what was released or heard, but because of what was imagined. It lives in speculation, in the quiet spaces between sound and silence, in the minds of those who yearn for glimpses of the extraordinary. It reminds us that history is not only what is recorded, but also what is felt, perceived, and imagined. Michael and Prince had danced on the edge of possibility, leaving a legacy that transcended recordings, charts, and accolades, a legacy of fleeting, impossible perfection. The story does not end with the departure of the artists. In many ways, it begins anew in the minds of those who dare to imagine it. The studio, now quiet, held the weight of unspoken emotion and invisible music, a sacred space where the impossible had briefly become reality. In that quiet, one could sense the magnitude of what had occurred. Even if no sound remained, Michael Jackson and Prince, two forces of nature, had collided and converged in a rare alignment that left both changed. The night was a mirror reflecting the duality of genius, ambition and vulnerability, rivalry and respect, perfection and spontaneity. Each man had faced the other's brilliance and recognized a reflection of his own. The encounter was a reminder that even the greatest artists are shaped not only by their achievements, but also by the moments they share, the challenges they face, and the risks they take in pursuit of the extraordinary. Fans would never hear the full songs, never witness the harmonies, never see the fleeting smiles exchanged over a perfect chord. And yet, the emotional resonance of that night has endured. It exists in the collective imagination, a mythic echo that transcends the limitations of time and sound. Some legends are immortal not because of visibility, but because of mystery. And this night had become one of those immortal myths. There is a lesson in that mystery. True artistry is not measured by consumption or acclaim, but by courage, the courage to meet another mind equally formidable, the courage to explore the unknown, the courage to create even when the world may never witness it. Michael and Prince embodied that courage, and the night they shared stands as a testament to the fleeting, fragile, and exhilarating nature of genius. And there, in the shadows of what could never be recorded, lies the emotional payoff, a story of what happens when perfection meets improvisation, when meticulous control encounters fearless spontaneity, when two legends recognize each other not as competitors, but as mirrors of brilliance. The night becomes a meditation on the nature of creativity itself, a reminder that some of the most profound moments in history are invisible, unrecorded, yet eternally felt. As the memory of that night echoes through decades, it leaves us with questions as intoxicating as the music itself. What might have been if the collaboration had continued? What melodies were lost to silence? What magic remains hidden, waiting to be imagined? These questions, unanswered and tantalizing, ensure that the story endures not as a record, but as a living legend. Ultimately, the night Prince walked into Michael Jackson's studio is a story of convergence, the convergence of talent, vision, and emotion. It is a story that transcends the ordinary, a story that asks us to believe in the impossible. And while the music itself may be unheard, the impact is undeniable. It whispers across time, inspiring those who seek to understand not just music, but the nature of brilliance itself. The door of that studio has long been closed, but in the imagination, it remains open. Inside, two legends continue to play, two minds continue to converse, and a night that could never be fully captured remains immortal, a myth, a whisper, a glimpse of perfection that defies history, yet endures forever in the hearts of those who dare to imagine it. The story leaves us with one final thought. Genius is not always about what the world sees or hears. Sometimes it is about what transpires in the quiet, in the unseen spaces, in the invisible collision of brilliance. And in that quiet collision, Michael Jackson and Prince created a moment that is, and always will be, untouchable, unforgettable, and eternal.